Welcome to Awareness to Action, a podcast brought to you by Northwestern Community Services Prevention and Wellness. I'm your host, Casey, a social worker and prevention and wellness specialist here in Virginia. Our goal is to bring you stories of people who are engaging in their communities in meaningful ways, to hopefully inspire and encourage you to seek those connections in your own community.
Hello, and welcome back to Awareness to Action. Today we have Liam Hudson joining us on the show. Liam is a dedicated advocate for housing access, health equity, and LGBTQIA+ rights. As the founder and CEO of the Lean In Project, Liam has led initiatives that uplift and empower LGBTQIA+ Virginians through advocacy, community engagement, and resource development. With a Master of Management in Health Policy and certification as a trauma-informed care trainer, Liam brings a deep understanding of the intersections between housing, health, and social justice. His career spans direct service, state-level housing administration, and program management, always centering equity and systemic change. In our conversation, we discussed the Lean In Project, what it looks like to build capacity and partner effectively across the region, and the many ways in which we continue to do important work in challenging times. I felt grateful to have this conversation with Liam, and I hope you'll enjoy it too. Liam, welcome to Awareness to Action.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so glad you're here. And let's just start with you telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and then about how the Lean In Project came to be.
Sure, yeah. So, hi, folks. Liam Hudson. I am a certified trauma-informed care instructor. I've been a supportive and affordable housing professional for about 12 years now. And recently, within the last 5 years, I started a nonprofit called the Lean In Project. We're based in South Boston, Virginia, but we do offer crisis services across the state. And we are primarily geared towards serving folks who are in the LGBTQIA+ community. Again, we do a lot of crisis services, but we also are just here for general support and awareness and advocacy for a hyper-marginalized group.
We know that organizations like yours take a lot of work and a lot of care to create and then to carry out over time. So can you just talk a little bit about the process of actually starting the Lean In Project, why it mattered to you and your co-collaborators to get it started?
Yeah, of course. It started really organically, to be honest with you. I moved back to my hometown, which is in Southern Virginia, during the peak of the pandemic. And my mom actually was just connecting me with people left and right who she felt like needed resources. And then it became more of, I think more than I was able to personally provide capacity wise. And I just noticed a real need in this region for folks and noticed that they also had no outlet. And so we decided to officially incorporate our nonprofit. We got our board together. It was about a year of planning before we actually were able to provide any services. But in the time since, we've served almost 200 people. We do a lot of safety planning for folks, which I'm realizing that not everyone has always done with their identity in mind. It's often done with like mental health or crisis in mind, but not so much about like what is safe for you as a person based on your experience in this world. We also partner with some of our regional organizations and nonprofits to host 2 major events a year, one of which is the We Stand Together Summit, which is probably what's put us on the map most recently because everyone told us that we could not pull off an LGBTQIA summit in Southside Virginia, but we've done it twice now. So really excited about our trajectory.
It's pretty amazing what you've done in 5 years. I have a question on kind of 2 ends of the spectrum of the work you're doing. So first, how did you decide what to focus on? Like when you're in that year of planning and creating, people who care a lot usually want to help in all areas and do all things, but that's just really not a sustainable model. So what did it look like for you to kind of whittle down where your focus would be and what kind of care and support you would provide to your community?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So my co-founder is a master's of public health, and I have a master's in health administration and management. And so we knew something with health, and we both come from case management backgrounds. So we've done a lot of advocacy work for folks throughout our entire careers. So we knew that that was going to be a pretty comfortable space for us. And I would say about 75% of the crisis reports we get are medically related. So it has proven useful. Also, I think just in terms of overall crisis planning, we had to be really smart about what do we as people have in our own personal resource stack? Who are we connected to that have resources that we don't have? And if we don't have any connections, nor do we have any resources, how can we make sure we're getting folks connected to the folks that do? And so that's pretty much our model, which is we field everything. We have a realistic conversation about what it would look like for us to help this person versus what it would look like for us to connect them with others. And then we go from there. And so far, it's worked pretty well. We've definitely had some moments or some interactions where we thought we were providing one service and then we got in and it was just a lot deeper than we could actually be helpful with. And so we do a lot of reality checking with ourselves too, which I think is important. My co-founder and I are both really honest with each other, and that has made it the most successful, in my opinion.
I so appreciate the concept of reality checking within an organization that's providing care, because I just have seen so many times where people with great intentions are, again, wanting to do it all and maybe have the expertise to be able to do a lot of things in a lot of realms, but just no one person or one organization truly has that capacity. And so I guess I'm wanting to know from your perspective. I guess I'm thinking of my perspective, which is that it strengthens your work in your community to be not doing everything, because you are making connections to other people who are doing good work and good things. But that's the Casey perspective. So I'd love the Liam perspective on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're pretty spot on. We have great relationships with our local homeless services providers. We have great relationships with our community services board and other behavioral health providers in the area. Actually, this is not something I think we intended, but has happened really organically as we've developed a relationship with our local police department, who was getting a lot of calls related to interpersonal violence or kids not having shelter. They were getting a lot of calls from schools as well. And so it's been really, I would say, helpful, but also enriching for us as a newer nonprofit to really, I think, also feel that support from our community, right? And be able to engage in open conversations with providers where they feel safe. I go in there and it's not a judgment thing that they don't know an acronym or know how to best address a trans person on an intake form. And so I think that that's been really, really helpful, and also helping providers feel more confident in the services they're providing too.
I think that really relates to the concept of bringing our whole selves into our work. It's great if you can provide the service, but when you can show up and be that non-judgmental presence, when you can show up and truly offer an extended hand, it makes all the difference. And it does make those community connections stronger. It makes people want to continue collaborating and all the good things that we want and hope for. My question on the other end of the spectrum that I mentioned is, you started as a hyper local initiative. Like, you started small and you have really expanded your reach across Virginia. I mean, I'm in Richmond, we're talking. I got connected with you through Northwestern up in Shenandoah. So can you speak a little bit to what it's been like to grow across the Commonwealth?
The first word that comes to mind is unbelievable. And not necessarily in that I can't believe there are so many people that need this resource, because I absolutely do. I think it's just, I really am shocked that with all of the stigma and I think kind of the bias surrounding the Southside region, that we're one of the only organizations in the whole state doing what we do. Selfishly, it's very flattering that folks want to work with us and want to engage with us and trust us to help their communities out. But I'll also say that the back end of that is that it's been a rude awakening in some senses of how few resources are actually available, how few resources that are available are queer led. I think is another thing. There are tons of cisgender straight allies who are wonderful, wonderful people and have the best of intentions and may offer everything they have, but they're just never going to understand the experience in the same way. And sometimes that can make all the difference. But I think part of us showing up in the way that we do and expanding so quickly is that a lot of smaller communities have reached out to me being like, I didn't know this was possible in a small community. How did you do it? How do you deal with people who are naysayers or who are discriminatory? Like, how do you reasonably do it? And so I would say that has been an overwhelming positive of this experience is being able to connect with other folks from rural regions, from small regions, hostile regions, to say like, no, this is achievable. It takes a lot of work and sometimes a lot of choice words, but it is achievable.
Yeah. I'd love to lean into the challenges and the difficulties of the work and the wake up calls that you mentioned. What does it look like to take care of yourself when doing the hard work? I always like to talk about that with people because I know we have a lot of folks listening who are doing good and challenging work in very hard times, which we'll talk more about later. But what does that self care and protection look like for you?
I would say I'm still learning to pour into my own cup fully. I do have a really excellent therapist that I can talk to about anything, and that's super helpful. I'm also a big hiker, and so I like to do a lot of hiking and just be out in nature, and that's really helpful. In terms of the protective piece, there have been a lot of scary moments. We've had people approach us at events, and that hasn't felt so safe. We've received really threatening letters to our home. We get a lot of comments on our social media, sometimes emails, and it's jarring every time. Even when you expect it, I think definitely with the way the social climate is moving, we are expecting it more and more and have definitely seen an uptick in it, but it's such a moment of, wow, this person who doesn't know me or us or anybody in this community just doesn't like us and is unwilling to see us as human almost. We've had to engage some legal counsel around certain things. I highly recommend anybody that's engaging in this work to have a very strong legal counsel. We also have a super, super supportive board. And we actually had an instance a few months ago where we had to back out of a long term partnership, which is never fun or ideal. And our board, they actually pushed me and they were like, Liam, you're being too nice about this. Like, walk away. And so I think it's nice to have people in my corner that feel comfortable checking me in that way because I will absolutely just like grin and bear it, which is not recommended.
I think when you are a direct service professional and you're providing direct care to individuals in the community, if you have education and training in that, you are given tools to set boundaries, like to set boundaries in client work, to be able to articulate what the parameters of your work and your care are. I don't think that we're really given any skills or tools on how to do that with other organizations or with community partners. And just hearing you say this, I'm like, yeah, you really do learn on the fly and you don't have the same knowledge to lean back on because I think you don't even realize how much it's going to come up until you're in the field and you're like, wait, no one mentioned this before. We talked 1,000 times about clients and never about organizations. So, any thoughts on that?
I'm from a small town, so a funny anecdote is I said something to a community partner one time, and it was not a comment that I even remembered making really. And they called my mom. And I think that's a very unique experience of operating in a small town and trying to establish your own identity when a lot of people do know you. And I think reestablishing myself as a professional in my hometown who is able to sit at the table with these other organizations that have been there 30, 40 years. We received a huge grant from the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services last year. And it was interesting because in order to utilize the funds, we had to be on an advisory committee with at least three other organizations. And they did not want us in the room. They had been the three receiving that funding for 7 or 8 years. They didn't want a new partner to come in. And so that relationship in particular took a lot of background rapport building. It was a lot of, hey, let's grab lunch, let's grab a coffee. I'm going to call you so we can chat about this quick thing so that they can get to know us as people too. And that's helped a lot. It's also nice. I've learned a lot about which partners enjoy frank conversations and which partners don't. I have some partners that I can see, hey, I think you guys could benefit from some training in this area to better support your clients. And they're absolutely receptive to that. And then I have some that if I say something like that, they probably won't email me back for a little while. And so it's really, I don't want to say a game, but it is very psychological. And you have to know not only the organizational culture that you're stepping into, but the people in that organization that you're working with. And you have to be willing to have some sort of personal engagements or interactions with them.
Yeah, absolutely. When you said it's not a game, I'm thinking of Survivor and like having a social game and a social strategy, which sounds wild to say to talk about community work, but it's true. Like you are working with all of these people who really care and are doing good work, but it's complex and everybody's coming at it from different backgrounds. And when you say a new partnership, it sounds great. But if someone's looking at that saying, well, that's less funding for us, then yeah, makes sense that they're a little prickly when you're walking into the room. So I just really appreciate you sharing that perspective. The first thing someone sees when they are entering your website is lean into yourself, lean into your community, which I love. That's like the banner at the top. And we'll have it linked in the episode description for anyone listening. You can go see for yourself. But your focus is really on making the community safer for LGBTQIA plus folks. And part of that is capacity building. I feel like we've talked a bit about the very direct work that you do, but I'd love to talk about the capacity building in the broader community. When we're talking about utilizing more inclusive practices in our work, what does that actually look like in action? What does it look like for you to be providing education and resources on that?
It looks different for everyone. I think when we first started, we developed this like training toolkit that we thought would be universally applicable and just has not been. And so now when we engage with partners, whether they're new or old, we always have a level setting conversation to say, first of all, are we being brought in because you as an organization has noticed issues, or are we being brought in as a preventative or an educational thing? And so that is really going to structure the way that we approach it. For me, if an organization is already experiencing some issues, whether it be staff comfort or their intake documents aren't super accommodating or all kinds of things, they don't know how to document something in case notes, then we would act very directly to address those specific issues and then also offer some supplemental training. If it's a purely training thing, it's much more high level. It's usually like group trainings or department trainings that we're brought in to do. We like to do day-long trainings. I find that that's best to help everybody kind of digest and process the information. And then we allow up to a month for folks to call us back in if there's a topic that they want more coverage on or they need more resources. We also work with all of the organizations to develop tools specific to their organization. And so we just helped another community partner write their strategic plan because they wanted to be more inclusive of LGBTQ folks. Again, I keep bringing up intake documents, but we create a lot of intake documents. We've done checklists of like, hey, here are safe questions to ask people. And something that we're hearing a lot more with folks being afraid that their records are discoverable are what is safe for me to put in a case note? How do I describe this situation without outing a person in this note? And so we're developing tools on what that could look like. I will say in that respect, it has been a long time since I actually wrote a case note, but we do try to make sure that they adhere to best practice standard and are safe for everyone.
As you just said, we have mentioned intakes a few times, but what's like an example of how an organization might make an intake process more inclusive?
So a big one we see, especially with the trans community, is their names and their gender markers. Typically, especially in like a community services board or even a homeless service provider, a lot of the documents have already been sent over to the provider based on the referral that they've gotten. And so what we recommend is that they just have a blanket level conversation that says like, hey, any official documents will have this name and gender on it, and I have to do that for legal reasons. However, your intake paperwork is based on what you want to be called and how you're most comfortable. And so For the documents we create, we have a tiny little box at the bottom that says legal name. So we do kind of the opposite of what most folks do, whereas most intake paperwork, you see legal name and then preferred name. And for ours, it's just name. And then down at the bottom, there's a space to fill in if there's a legal name. We don't use the term preferred name. It's just person's name. A lot of the questions, particularly in homeless services, can be really gender specific in like unnecessary ways. And so we do a lot to make them just broader, but also get the information that HUD wants, you know?
I want to circle back to talking about safety planning in maybe, what's the word I'm looking for? Unconventional ways. Similarly to what you said before, like safety planning, I think is really talked about in a very specific way. And so I'd love to just hear more about what that safety planning that you're talking about looks like, what it means to have a safety check for yourself.
Of course. Yeah. So from a services perspective, when we're doing safety planning, we do, I would say, typical crisis services safety planning. So we assess any suicidal ideation or self-harm risk. But we also are talking about things like, how does your family make you feel? Are you safe at school? Are your friends affirming of your identity? And if the answer to any of those questions is no, then we start immediately developing like, okay, so you don't feel safe at school. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Is there anyone? Do you have a teacher, an administrator, a guidance counselor that you can rely on? Most of the time, folks are able to identify at least one person. We've only had a few times where folks couldn't identify anyone, and then we've had to go a little deeper to like, okay, we clearly need to get you connected to affirming resources now. I also think that we recommend that people scan for things that the average crisis and safety plan don't. We talk a lot about physical safety in bathrooms. We talk a lot about just physical safety in general. I think our community has developed a heightened awareness of gun violence in particular. And so if folks are interested, we talk to them about ways to stay safe in public situations. We have a lot of folks that like to go to festivals. And so what can we do at festivals? Or if you're engaging in a public display or anything where harm could occur, what do you need to have on your body? What's safe for you to wear? What's not safe for you to wear? Should you be posting this information on Snapchat? We go a lot deeper than just the, let's talk about your physical well-being in this moment.
I want to be clear that I'm not downplaying traditional methods of safety planning because they're invaluable, truly, and have been incredibly useful in my own work. I just really appreciate all the specifics you're sharing because I think times change. Like even what you're talking about Snapchat, that wouldn't have mattered on a safety check 20 years ago, but it does matter now. And safety that they feel in public spaces is different. You know, it just, things change and our tools have to be able to keep up and to adapt and evolve in ways that are useful and are not leaving big and important things out. So yeah, I just appreciate that.
It's also something that we've evolved over time. We did expect to work with a high number of youth, but I think that I was really underestimating how vulnerable youth were online. And so, we have folks who are really susceptible to scams. We have folks who think they meet people online and then want to go out, like fly out and meet them. And so we've also started including some of that in our safety check of like, how safe is this person you've been talking to? We have a relationship red flag test that we have folks fill out if they want to, and it just gives them a score based on the answers they put and tips on how to respond to those answers. And I think it's different. It's been really different for everybody that we've worked with so far. But I'm also really proud to say that in the almost 200 people we've helped, we've had 3 people come back and need to be re-entered into crisis services. That feels pretty good. It feels like something is clicking somewhere.
Absolutely. I respect your openness to evolving and to just what you shared about changing that over time. I think the times we're in now just really require us to be open to changing what's worked and acknowledging it. You know, what you mentioned before, that frankness of saying this is not actually working anymore. It might have worked for the last 20 years. And now in 2025, it's not cutting it. And yeah, being open to that, I think, is crucial for all of us, anyone who knows anyone, which is all of us. So something I've heard you share before that I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about is using affirmation as a tool. Can you just share a bit more about that?
Of course. So I was actually just reading a study conducted by NIH in 2020, and they polled nearly 500 people who identified as LGBTQIA plus. And of the nearly 500 that they polled, over 60% identified as having a mental health disorder or a serious mental illness. As I stated earlier, my background, a lot of where my specialty has been focused is in that trauma piece. And so I very much believe that trauma is a significant contributor to a lot of mental health and SMI symptoms. And so one of the things that we started exploring with the Trevor Project is the Trevor Project essentially started this campaign that was like safe kids are safe adults, which I thought was a really cool way to put it. And so we worked with Southside Behavioral Health specifically to do that in a smaller way. And our first group of kids, I think we had like 14 or 15 kids. And so we just kind of put the theory to the test and we held focus groups, but we also monitored them over the period of 2 years. And the kids who came into the space and were completely reserved and shut down and quiet and just kind of sat there and like picked at their hands the whole time. By the end of the 2 years, were some of the most vocal kids in the room. And almost every single kid we spoke to said, I've never had a space where I've just been allowed to be myself. And like, I can be myself. I would say that group came from 3 different high schools and many of them did not know each other beforehand. And I know several of them are still actively talking to each other. And so I think that to me was such a small example of how important community is, how important it is to help kids feel like themselves. I know for me personally, if I had seen a trans person or even a queer person growing up, I don't think I would have struggled as much as I did with my own shame around my identity. My parents also really struggled because they'd never known anyone or seen anyone. And so I think they were really scared for what that meant for me. I think the more that we can make folks feel safe and comfortable for being who they are, the more we can start to eliminate some of that stigma and some of that guilt and shame that is ultimately going to weigh on folks for many, many years.
That affirmation is its own form of safety planning and protection. And I feel very moved by what you just shared about those safe spaces. All any of us can ever really hope for is to have a space where we feel safe and people who help us feel safe. And one of my colleagues uses the phrase brave spaces. We're creating safe spaces and we're creating brave spaces. And that's exactly what you're doing. And props to you because it's so important.
Thank you.
So, I'm thinking about safe spaces and brave spaces, and they are more necessary than ever right now. To say that we're in a challenging time or a tumultuous time is an understatement. I don't think there are really words to summarize what people are feeling right now. So I would love to know what your hopes are for the Lean In Project and the people and communities you serve in the year ahead.
I will say I'm thankful that my co-founder and I continue to be extremely committed to the Lean In Project because recent months have not been easy from a personal perspective, from a professional trying to do this work perspective, but also all of our funding was cut. And so we've really had to move really quickly to understand what the next couple of years. So thankfully, all of our crisis services have always been 100% mutual aid based so that we can be more flexible with the services we provide. So that aspect of what we do hopefully won't change as much, but I think our capacity to hold events and to offer free trainings and to do a lot of the things that honestly, I think are some of the most beneficial things we add to our community. We're still figuring those out. And so our goal is to still be here, still be a pillar of support, and still provide those trainings and those resources any way we can. That might look a little different. We might have to get pretty creative with like, hey, we can only offer virtual trainings for the time being, or have to shift a little bit that way. But I'd really love to see us still growing in our community. I want folks to still feel comfortable reaching out to us and asking us for these resources. I'd also like to see a little bit of tangible and out loud support for us, I think would be really meaningful and helpful, and just showing that not only are we in this community, but the community wants us there. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Absolutely it does. And I'm grateful that you shared your hopes with us. What, for someone who's listening and is like, yeah, let me share my tangible out loud support, what does that look like? What can they do?
We always welcome donations, but also engage with us on social media. We try to really share a lot of information. We also have all of our crisis contact information on social media. And so just folks sharing that information, sharing events when we do them, engaging with our posts so that they don't get shadow banned. My Gen Z intern taught me all about what that was because I was too old to know for myself. And so I think social media is a huge way. I also think we work with a lot of partners who are very embarrassed by maybe what they don't know or how things have gone in the past. And so something I always say, like the biggest way that folks can support us, and not just us as Lean In Project, but us as a community, is just let some of that guilt and shame go and replace it with learning and replace it with empathy and show up to these brave spaces vulnerably. And I think that's a big thing where, especially with adults and youth dynamics, is sometimes it can be so hard to get adults to just apologize. And that's all it takes, right? Hey, I messed up. I'm sorry. I'm going to work on this. Give me some grace. I think those are all ways that folks can really help us in helping folks engage in this work.
Those are great suggestions. And we'll link the things you mentioned in the episode description again for anyone who's interested. I love asking people who love resources about the resources they love. So, and your website has a lot of them. So, not asking you to share all of them, but any resources that you'd like to highlight for those listening who are wanting to engage further or get connected in a new way.
Absolutely. Equality Virginia, they're a state advocacy agency for LGBTQIA folks. They do lots of events. They do lobby days for folks who are policy and politically minded. They're a great resource to engage with. We have a really, really great chapter of the ACLU in Virginia, and so can't shout them out enough. In terms of queer specific resources, there's the Hampton Roads Life Center, which does a lot of great work. They have a physical space and offer, they think, mental health treatment, physical health treatment. I know that they do some housing work. The Roanoke Diversity Center is a great space. It's more of a community space. They have a library where folks can just go and sit and don't have to spend money to be a part of that space. It's also a sober space for folks who do want to be there. And then there's the Shenandoah Center as well, and which I think is also a great physical space for folks. I know they offer a lot of services and events too. And then the more national ones, the Trevor Project is great. I will say an area where I think we are really lacking in this work is that we don't have tangible and feasible data specifically for adults. And we have a lot of impact reports around youth. We have a lot of homelessness numbers and disparity numbers around youth, but we don't have a lot on adults. And so it makes it really difficult sometimes to make a case, especially if we're talking about serious mental illness or if we're talking about somebody engaging in the homeless system. They may not be entered into the system correctly. And I'm getting off on a tangent here, so I'll pull myself back. But I do think that that's an area where we collectively could be a lot stronger.
Thank you for sharing those resources. I guess I just want to close by asking you the question that we ask all of our guests, which is, what does the process of awareness to action mean to you?
I think it's realizing that something is maybe missing or needs to be done, educating yourself or tapping into the resources around you to figure out how to do that. And then I really think of it as just kind of a pull or plunge. Sometimes you just have to know that it might be a little cold and shocking at first, but it needs to be done. And then once you're in there and you learn a little bit more, it becomes more comfortable over time. And then I think there's a time where you'll look back and can't believe you didn't know what you didn't know.
Fantastic answer. I love the polar plunge visual. Well, thank you so much, Liam, for joining us on the show and for sharing everything you've shared. I'm really grateful to have had this conversation with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me, Casey.
Thank you for listening, and thank you again to Liam for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to Awareness to Action so you don't miss out on any future episodes.